Good evening, friends, and you are watching Weekend at 5 with me, Navdeep Kaur Marwa. A look at the top headlines of the day today. To begin with, Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern has recently said that from 11:59 p.m. on Wednesday, vaccinated travelers to New Zealand will no longer need to self-isolate. In her cabinet meeting, she also revealed that New Zealanders traveling from beyond Australia will be allowed to return from this Friday, also without having to isolate. This date earlier was March 13th. This news has been welcomed by one and all who feel that now returning to New Zealand will be easier as they no longer need to self isolate. Moving on, there have been 14,633 new community cases of COVID 19 in New Zealand today. 344 people are in hospital and 5 are in ICU as revealed by Ministry of Health. Moving on, New Zealand is putting aside an initial $2 million for humanitarian aid to help the people of Ukraine. Lastly, Minister David Parker is the first New Zealand MP to get COVID 19, he revealed. Now, moving to our interview section. We all know the Reserve Bank has raised the official cash rate OCR by a quarter of a percentage point to 1%. We have Prateek Malhotra of Loan Market with us to tell us more about it and its implication on a normal person. Welcome to the show, Prateek.
Thank you. Thank you for having me, Navdeep.
How are you, Prateek?
Good, good. Very well. How are you?
Very well. Prateek, to begin with, I'm sure a lot of people would not understand this in a simple way. What is OCR?
So basically, OCR stands for official cash rate. That's effectively, you could say, that's the money that the banks, Reserve Bank, uses to give it to the trading banks, and that's the rate that they charge. So that's what it stands for.
Right. So if we talk about normal, in a normal day-to-day loan, if somebody wants a loan, how would that affect that person? If suppose I want a home loan today, so
I
how would
think
this?
and it's always linked to the borrowing rates or the rates that the banks are charging to the client. So with the increase to 1%,
Mhm.
we're probably at one of the highest in the last maybe 4 or 5 years, because the rates had been dropping. We were sitting at almost next to 0% for a very long time.
Mhm.
With the OCR increase, the floating rates have gone up. You can see the banks have already put up their rates to 5.05. Some of them are 5.1.
Mhm.
It has affected some of the clients that have borrowed money to buy brand new properties.
Right.
The fixed rates was the increases in the fixed rates were already built in over the last month and a half.
Mhm.
Um, it does affect the repayments that the clients would be paying for whatever amount they've borrowed. So we've seen rates jump from somewhere around 2.2% or 2.29%
Mhm.
to 4.29, which is almost a 2% jump.
Right.
So that does affect the repayments that the clients are making. It also affects the testing rates that the banks are using to lend money, which will make
Mhm.
it harder.
Mhm.
For the same amount of money that the people are borrowing, it'll make it harder for clients to borrow.
Mhm.
Um, and I think with the way things are, we're probably going to see some more increases in the OCR in 2022.
Right. So it means getting a home would be a little more tough now.
Yeah, it will certainly get tougher. Having said that, the prices are kind of stabilized now. They are not jumping as much as they were, say, 2 3 months ago.
Mhm.
So it could be a good time for the potential buyers to start looking at it and see if they can get the same house that they were looking at 3 months ago. What's the
Right.
price of that? And yeah, the cost of borrowing has certainly gone up, but again, with the increase in minimum wages and things like that, it might make it easier for some people, but certainly for first home buyers, it's going to be a little bit harder.
Right. So if you said that repayment becomes tough, like it will be higher if somebody has taken a loan or mortgage. So how much that difference would be like, estimated 1%, 2% in like we talk about money, weekly mortgage or monthly mortgage, how would that increase in terms of money?
I think it's very hard to put an average of it, but for example, if you were to borrow $500,000 to, if it's your standard mortgage is $500,000, the rates that we've seen, which have increased from, as I said, 2 point, or early twos to early fours now,
Mm-hmm.
on a $500,000 mortgage, you're looking at an increase of almost, with the current rates, you're looking at almost per 100 to 100,
Oh my.
which over a year does stack to add up. I mean, it will cost you another, whatever, five and a half to six
Mm-hmm.
thousand dollars a year.
Mm-hmm.
It does make buying a home a little bit more expensive than what it was 4 months ago.
Right.
Um, but yeah, it's something that we had to deal with.
So, what do you think are the reasons behind this decision by Reserve Bank? What has you think it's inflation? It's the what had triggered this thing that the OCR has gone up?
I think we have been, as I said, we've been having a low OCR for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
Inflation sitting at 5.9% is one of the biggest reasons why they had to do it. Oil prices and all that, as we can see, they're jumping up. It's almost $3 a liter now. Groceries, power, rates, insurances, everything seems to be expensive. I
Mm-hmm.
think it's probably the highest we've seen in the last 30 years, if I'm not mistaken. I think it's just to counter that. The For the last couple of years, due to COVID and all that, the rates were reduced. If anybody remembers, just before we had COVID, we had just started to see the rates or OCR starting to increase, but then Reserve Bank decided to cut the rates to help out the businesses and small, homeowners. I think that thing is coming off, and with the way things are, with supplies being so limited,
Mm-hmm.
there's building materials not coming through, nothing's coming through, and everything's getting very in short supply. uh,
Right.
eh, it's what happens overseas does affect us as a nation, so it's probably one of those things which Reserve Bank has to do or had to
Yeah.
do to increase the rates.
If we talk about people, general people, and who want to buy a house, do you think the government should do something for them? Do you think they will backtrack this OCR? It will only go higher now.
I
It will
think
only.
the chances of the OCR coming down is pretty low. On the
Mhm,
contrary, I think what we've been hearing is that the rates will probably go up to as much as 3% by 2024.
mhm,
I think when it comes to the government, they have done a few measures, but unfortunately, they've kind of backfired.
mhm,
For first home buyers, there's the limits of 650 to buy or 700 to buy a brand new property. Uh, in Auckland, especially, is getting very hard to come by.
mhm,
If they were to do something, they could look at making it easier for first home buyers to borrow money from the banks.
mhm.
I don't know how will that work in terms of the instructions, because banks are pretty much independent. Um,
Right.
but yeah, if there could be something that to incentivize the first home buyer, that could be done. That will help them. But at the moment, everything that seems to be that everyone seems to be doing seems to be backfiring for the first home buyers, because the investors are the ones who've been able to borrow money against their existing properties to buy
Right.
brand new properties,
Mhm.
whereas the first home buyers have been struggling to come up with that 10%. The prices have gone up so much in the last 18 months or so.
Right.
Um, yes, to incentivize the first home buyer, I think it has to be something which the banks and the governments need to work together.
Right. And also the banks don't seem to do anything better for the first home buyers even. They're also going as per the government thing, and then the loss is only of the first home buyer.
I think their hands have been tied behind the back because of the restriction which the Reserve Bank has put on them, which is, I think, one thing we need to understand is banks are in the business of lending money. They make money by lending money, not by
Mhm,
keeping them.
mhm.
But they've been restrained by that restrictions or LVR restriction which the Reserve Bank has put on them.
Right.
Um, until those restrictions are released, or until the first home buyer are put under exemption category,
Mhm.
I don't see this thing changing anytime. Have the first home buyer at the same level as the investors, and which seems to be happening quite a lot.
Right.
And that is
Mhm.
putting first home buyers on the back foot.
Right. So I think now the dream of getting a home is becoming more tougher for all the people here. They already it was tough and becomes tougher now.
It is going to be tough for the next year or so. But I think when you talk to any first home buyers, it has always been tough to buy a first home, whether it is now or whether it was 20 years ago.
Right.
Um, it's always been tough to get your first home, but now with the prices the way are, you're looking at $1 million purchase, you're looking at a deposit of 100,000, and that's not something that is easy
Right.
for any young first home buyers. Um, and I think the efforts that everyone's been making, whether it's the government or the banks, or I think they seem to be backfiring. So something needs to be done. As I said, if the banks and the government can work together, a scheme to come out to help out the first home buyer, especially just the first home buyer, that'll be a big help. Whether it's to
Right.
do with 5% deposit or whether it's to incentivize them with any type of rates or anything like that, that could help. But again, as I said to you, that hasn't happened in the past, and I don't see it happening anytime soon. So I think the first home buyers do have it a little bit tough.
My last question before we end the interview would be: what is your advice to the first home buyers at this point? People who are thinking of buying house, what will be your advice to them?
I think the way things are after the triple CFA changes, I think the key is to keep a tab on your expenses. That's very, very important now. What you spend your money on, whether it eat out, takeaways or Uber Eats, or I'm not going to sit here and preach anything, but that's what something that is being looked at by the banks more and more aggressively. Have a good savings plan. Just see what your incoming income is and what your outgoings are. Once you write it down, then you can probably see it for yourself how much you're spending. Otherwise, you just tend to ignore it. One of the saying is that you spend after you save. You don't save after you spend.
Right.
So if you do that, I think, and have a plan as to when you want to buy it. If it is in 6 months' time, see how much savings you've got, and what do you
Mm-hmm.
need to get to that 10% or 5%, or I think minimum 10%. But
Mm-hmm.
your expenses over the last 3 months is very, very important. Just keeping a tab on them. It's like finding a full-time job these days. Like,
Mm-hmm.
you got to have a plan and got to stick to it, whether it takes 6 months or a year,
Right.
but you got to
Right.
stick to it.
Right, right. Thank you so much for your time, Mr. Pratik. And I hope the government, as you said, does something so that it becomes easier for the first home buyers to have their dream home in New Zealand.
I hope so too. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much.
All right.
So, friends, that was Mr. Prateek Malhotra telling us that how the OCR will affect the first home buyers and what they need to do if they want to. His advice that if you're planning to buy a new house, what all you should look into. For all the latest news, keep watching IndianWeekender.co.nz.